So welcome everyone. I have Zeal and Armunn here with me today. So today we're going to be peeling back the glossy veneer of what we call popular culture to examine the machinery humming beneath it. We are conditioned to believe that culture is organic, that music scenes like the Summer of Love, punk, or hip hop rise spontaneously from the streets, fueled by the raw emotion of the youth. But what if that is simply a Cinderella story? Designed to keep us sleeping. We are here to discuss the hypothesis that the music industry is not an artistic meritocracy, but a branch of the military industrial complex of the culture creation machine, a psychological operation perfected by the likes of the Tavistock Institute and the Frankfurt schools. As Edward Bernays stated, the nephew of Freud, he wrote in the opening of his 1927 work, Propaganda, quote, "We are governed, our minds are moulded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested largely by men we have never heard of," unquote. So let us begin by, dismantling this illusion. So firstly, before we do that, welcome Armunn and Zeal. I'll give you a chance to introduce yourselves.
Hi, this is Zeal. Hi, everyone.
Hey everyone, this is Armunn.
Hello, gentlemen. So just to clarify as well, we're all musicians here, with varying degrees of success, I guess.
Well, I'm a drummer.
Yeah, jump in, give us a brief background, both of you, in terms of your association
I
with
was
the
just
music
joking
industry.
there. You said we're musicians. I said I'm a drummer. I play the drums, so just to
Hey,
differentiate there.
that's still a musician, man. Don't worry.
Well, I can't really start complaining about the music industry, shills, given that I've spent time playing in bar bands, wedding bands, etc., and have ripped off all that music ad nauseum, playing for people in pubs and weddings over the years. I can't, sir. I can't. I don't know how much expose I can do here tonight when I've profiteered out of some of that stuff.
Oh, don't worry. I mean, I've played covers of these artists that we're going to cover as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I guess it's hypocrisy, but perhaps it's repentance in some way. How
Yeah.
about you, Armin?
Well, I mean, a musician. I wouldn't call myself a musician, but yes, I used to sing, and I was in bands, both covers and originals. So yeah, I've observed some things, especially in the last band I was, which was back in 2006, I believe, or seven. Around that time, or eight. It's been so long, I don't know. But yeah, and of course, this is more. My perspective is more down the observation of the actual music industry, paired with one or two things that I've observed. But yeah, I think it's going to be a fascinating discussion. So get us started here.
Absolutely. So, my first question to both of you, and whoever wants to jump in first. So, I discussed this idea of the Cinderella story, and interestingly, in the book, and I recommend everyone read this book. It's called Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon by Dave McGowan. Unfortunately, I think he passed recently. I'm not sure how recent, but that's unfortunate. Anyway, in that book, he meticulously documents how the icons of the 60s counterculture, Jim Morrison, Frank Zappa, Dave Crosby, were not working class rebels, but the children of high ranking military intelligence officers.
Mm,
I mean, there's an absolutely inexhaustible list of these that go all the way, of course, to the modern day as well.
mm.
And what I want to ask you both, a sort of double barreled question. How do you see this lineage continuing today with modern stars? And is the archetype of the struggling artist a necessary fiction to sell the agenda to the masses?
Well, right off the bat, a recent one I came across was Dave Grohl, the drummer for Nirvana, or should we say David Grohl. And I come to it. There's a reason I pronounce his name like that. I want to come back to that in a second. But Dave Grohl's father was a political advisor, right? He was a journalist and he was a political advisor. This is Dave Grohl's dad. Bear with me, the drummer from Nirvana. So Dave Grohl's dad is a political advisor, and who does he give political advice to? He gives political advice to a guy by the name of Taft, T-A-F-T, surname Taft. And Taft, the Taft family in America are a big sort of a hidden political power dynasty that might be, akin to the Kennedy dynasty as was. But the Taft family, one of them is directly responsible for setting up the Skull and Bones Society in, is it Harvard that's in, Silas? Skull and Bones?
Yale.
Yale.
Yale, I beg your pardon. So one of the Tafts is directly linked to originally setting up the original Skull and Bones Society. And another one of the Tafts was one of the former was a founding minister in another military intelligence kind of psyop, the Mormon religion and Salt Lake City. So, like, right off the bat, you're seeing a direct connection from conspiracy theories and kind of hidden societies directly to the drum throne, as it were, in Nirvana. Actually, while we're on the Nirvana thing, I think we mentioned some of this before. Kurt's friend was a gent by the name of Dylan Carlson, who I've met a couple of times, actually. Met him after gigs and just said hello, just passing hello. And Mr. Carlson's father was a military guy, and was actually Dylan Carlson who gave the shotgun to Kurt, which Mr. Cobain died from a gunshot from that gun. So that's just one right off the bat.
We also have
Yeah,
as
well,
well the. Oh,
Hmm.
jump in, Armin. Sorry, please.
No, go ahead, respond. Yeah.
I was going to say just really quickly. We also have, of course, I was into punk music. We have Stuart Copeland, who was
Right.
his. I think it was his brother was part of the Police. He was the Police's drummer, and
Yeah.
oh no, sorry, Stuart Copeland was the Police's drummer, but his father, I forget his father's name. I never listed it here, but he was a founding member of the CIA as well. So sorry,
Really?
Armin, please.
I
Yeah.
never knew that. Wow.
Yeah, it all links up, and even those that were not, at least out in the public and directly related, were manufactured anyway. And this is because it's important not to be entirely and solely focused on the genealogy, let's say, and the ascendancy of these figures, because even perhaps in the group that most changed pop culture in the 20th century, the Beatles,
Yeah.
is a complete manufacture. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I showed Silas and that I was aware of, but I wasn't aware of the scope of it, is that the Beatles had around 1,400 live appearances across their career, out of which, and these are official numbers. These are official numbers. So I think that these numbers are perhaps exaggerated themselves. So it's probably a much lesser number, if any. Out of those 1,400 live appearances, the official numbers are that only around 400 to 500 were actually played live. So
Mm.
just think about this for a second. We're talking
Yeah.
about a band of geniuses, right?
Yeah.
And especially that's double, the duo of McCartney and Lennon. Geniuses, composers, and
Mm.
the excellent players and singers, and so on and so forth. But when you recognize, and anyone that is into music recognizes that you see a musician's true face live, right?
Yeah.
You see if he can pull it
Yeah. Yeah.
off,
Yeah. Yeah.
is
Yeah.
in the live act. And they played less than half in official numbers. So imagine those that are not official, right? That were not counted as official. So in official numbers, less than half of their appearances were actually playing and
Yeah.
singing live.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if we take this into consideration, we can see, I mean, what goes on behind closed doors. Who really composed those songs? Who really played them? I mean, we know the influence of the arranger George Martin, right? That had, you know, I think he built the Beatles sound, in my opinion. But um, what goes on behind closed doors? Who were really these singers? Would it be a kind of hidden Milli Vanilli before Milli Vanilli was the thing, right? Was that scandal, which was a
There's
provoked scandal as well? So yeah, go ahead.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff about their manager as well. I remember coming about the Beatles
Right.
manager. Can you pull up his name there, Silas, or anyone who has access to the net there?
Yeah,
There was
get him
Brian
to
Epstein.
Brian
Epstein,
Epstein. Yes.
Epstein, and he was British, Silas, was he? He was.
Yes, born in Liverpool in 1934 and died in London in 1967 at 32 years of age.
Mm, it kind of has echoes of the stuff around, Francis Bacon and the Shakespeare stuff. That Shakespeare was essentially written by a committee of people in the same way, potentially, that the Beatles' music was. You know, there was multiple. Like, I remember hearing from another source that there was no way, or it was at least very, very highly unlikely, that they could have been as prolific as they were within the time frame in terms of the amount of albums and songs and whatnot that they put out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it was the same. Listen, this is not new because it was the same with Mozart. And of course, when we go into that far back, we have to take it with a pinch of salt. And you already are aware of my skepticism towards history. But even in the official records, Mozart is impossible.
mm,
And moreover, even the records of his musical scores that survived were not the final product that you see later on. They were highly corrected. They were full of mistakes. They weren't clearly written by the same hand. I mean, there are a lot of discrepancies even on the actual musical score for someone who is supposedly a genius to make such basic musical mistakes in writing. I mean, at the time, supposedly this was, your trade, right? To write the musical score, and it's nothing like the end product that we hear on, the orchestral works and so on and so forth. Nothing. And of course, the fact that he was so prolific, and again that thing about the prodigy, that he was so young already playing and so on and so forth. He was a fabrication. He didn't compose that music. Probably there wasn't even a musician by that name. There was probably a person, but not a musician by that name. And this was a fabrication because the it was to promote the idea of the golden child of the Freemasons, right? This idea of the ascended master that comes down, the spirit that comes down to matter, and elevates everyone and brings this genius into materiality. Coming, of course, from the school of Freemasonry. So the idea is that by being that it validates and legitimizes the Freemasonry in that narrative. So of course, I think that the Beatles are a similar concept to Mozart. Because they were supposedly coming out of nowhere. A bunch of kids from Liverpool that were as prolific as you state, and all these hits, and all of a sudden they change the entire the entire pop culture of the time, right? And I honestly think that we don't know, and especially when we look at even the official numbers of how many times they played live, we don't know if they were the actual guys playing, if they were the actual guys composing, if they were even the actual guys singing, because all this story about Paul is dead, that whole thing about Paul is dead, It could be to hide a different thing. It could be to hide that, the singer that used to be the voice of Paul McCartney might have had to have changed because, organically something may have happened to the guy. And, you produce this whole thing to, oh, yeah, Paul was replaced. And the only thing that was replaced was, the singer. Because, for example, in Sgt. Pepper's, if you listen carefully, you listen to two Paul McCartneys there, in my opinion. I don't think it's the same voice. But so what I'm trying to convey is that it is quite possible that the Beatles were an entire fabrication in the same scope as Mozart, of course, in different eras, if we are to consider that the Mozart era is as the historical record.
There's something I wanted to get to with, for example, so around about that time in the 60s, we had what appeared to be a sort of slow march from innocence to the sort of psychedelic, drug-fueled, rebellion of the later 60s and early 70s. And this, of course, also it paved the way for the likes of the CIA-backed feminist movement. And all of this really culminated in destroying the destruction of the family, the destruction of not just the nuclear family, but the destruction of all communities. And what you had was a rise of the pseudo tribe. And I'll get to some quotes on this after this question here. But this is for both of you. So we cannot separate the music from the social movements, right? We had the likes of Gloria Steinman, the face of second wave feminism, and it's been admitted that she was working as a CIA operative, and that her entire feminist movement was a CIA front, right? Even the organization, the Independent Research Service, was also a CIA front as well, and this was earlier in her career. So, what I want to ask you is the likes of the Beatles, the likes of of course, all of these military brats that were part of this, the likes of Jim Morrison, the Doors, and what have you. Was this to bring about this sort of march from innocence to the destructive, drug-addled late 60s? And we saw this really develop with the beat music in the 70s and the beat generation, the likes of Allen Ginsberg and what have you. And a lot of the beat generation poets and cultural icons, right, who were the first, the first eroders of American and Western culture, or at least the one that preceded this modern sexual revolution. They were also involved in MK Ultra by their own admission as well. They were given LSD by the CIA, and they were studied in terms of LSD's effects and all of this. So what do you think was going on here? Do you think it was to create these pseudo tribes to create what's also known as the pseudo individualization?
Yeah, I think that rock music, for example, originally I believe it had a kind of a spirit, an actual youth spirit in it, that it was a natural expression, and it was an American expression as well. It came out of the blues, and the blues came out of slavery. Essentially, it was an African American art form that was sort of hybridized by the white culture in America, and it was it was brought into a new format, and it was associated with rebellion originally as such, and it was sort of anti system, as it were, because because it was hybridized and came out of the blues. It was taboo because it was really a cultural artifact that stood against the racial state, in essence, because you had white musicians essentially that were taking on the shuffle and that kind of groove that came out of the blues and the feeling of the blues and making it into something new. So in its earliest stages, rock music was was a very pure, vibrant, kind of almost spirit force that kind of almost encapsulated a kind of something uniquely American, and also something that by default became a world kind of expressive force. And I think at a certain point in time, the power structure became very aware of that. And they, at that point, then began and successfully dismantled rock, that kind of spirit, and turned it into this kind of, this dysfunctional, morally debauched kind of, you know, kind of a broken thing, as it were, like something that was hideous ultimately. And they used it as a sort of a Pied Piper to kind of try to lead that youthful spirit into kind of self destruction. And I think that's that these bands that you're speaking of, and these movements, cultural movements, were essentially social engineering. It was essentially weaponized social engineering. And the wider, just to take a sidestep from it, the culture creates sort of artistic artifacts. Like in ancient Greece, they created a vase, for example, with paintings, motifs on it of gods or goddesses or whatever, Artemis, for example, whatever. And the vase, if you will, kind of took on a kind of a place in the cultural psyche as being a kind of a representation of where that culture was in terms of its of art and how it could mirror itself or kind of envisage itself in an aesthetic. So similarly, the music reflects the culture, but it also can be in a way to lead the culture, like a Pied Piper scenario. So they were creating these kind of cultural artifacts that were kind of inverted, kind of hideous, morally defunct sort of artifacts that were used to in turn reflect back to the youth essentially in those populations, and said, this is who you are. So if you believe that, then you sort of became that by osmosis. You were led into that kind of sphere, and that was the success of the manipulation and the kind of social engineering part of these cultural sort of these band movements, really, in music. But I mean, it doesn't stop in music. It goes into literature. It goes into the narrative, the novel. It goes into poetry. It goes into painting. You have all these forms that are, if you use a kind of a politically incorrect term, they're largely degenerative, and I mean that in the sense that they don't sort of bestow, beatify or celebrate nature, the natural order. They're kind of, they're shining a light on something that's a lot darker, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I agree that it was social engineering, absolutely, and we can't dissociate what happened in the art sphere, let's say, with what was happening in the ideological sphere, because again, I have to touch upon the emergence of the theosophy and theosophical related groups that were influencing since late, well, not even late, even before, but let's consider it formally since late 19th century. And that were, for example, one example is that in the West, Buddhism was introduced around that time, of course, with it didn't pick up immediately, but it was introduced, and it was sponsored, and it was insisted, and it was promoted and propagated. And in the 60s, you see the bloom of that seed, right? So it was planted back then, and then you see it sprouted, and it finally bloomed in the 60s with these well, let's call it hippie movements, whatever you want to call it, that were a preparation. And if you see even the transition that happened in the Beatles, so the Beatles were, one sort of group up until a certain point, and then they went into Hinduism, into Eastern philosophies, and their music entirely changed, right? And I mean, if you listen to their first album, and if you listen to their White album, for example, it has nothing to do, or if I think the
Yeah.
highest the highest example of that is the Magical Mystery Tour, right? So anyway, um, that transition was being applied behind even the art sphere, so at the ideological field, and was being like sort of a forced osmosis being transferred also into art, because they knew, of course, the effect that art has in the masses, right? And
Yeah,
so the idea was to sell a new religion
yeah,
by art, by the effect, the mass effect that art has. And so, I mean, after a certain point, it was one of the things that I was commenting with Silas the other night. After a certain point, when, for example, punk rock appeared, you got this impression that you didn't have to be a musician, that you didn't have to know how to play an instrument, you didn't have to know how to sing in tune to
mm,
record an album, and listen, I'm not saying, I mean, if people like punk rock, that's cool, but this is a fact. If we listen to the records, it's you hear a bad singer, you hear a drummer that is all over the place. The bass is trying to keep up. The guitars are, but that was the supposedly the rebellion, right? Oh, the rebellion. Now we don't need to learn how to play to record and to, have public visibility, right? So all of these things were stages of development of a narrative in the art world that were really backed up, in my opinion, and were pushed from the ideological side. And so, yes, 100% social engineering, as you were saying, Zeal.
mm. And I take up your point on, things like the mysticism, like they were pushing the new age stuff, you know,
Hmm.
probably from the 60s onwards, maybe earlier. But the new age, like the mysticism and the Buddhism, and the Beatles had Crowley on the cover of the Sergeant Pepper's. It's the occult as well. And really, really, what you're doing there is trying to push people's minds into a subjective quagmire of kind of pseudo mythos and just makey uppy, and you know get them lost in that whole kind of soup of until they disappear up their own arseholes, which is largely that's the success of the new age weapon. It gets people to just disappear into their own the vortex of their own rectum, and it does wreck them because they become completely incapacitated. They don't have any bearing left on reality, or they don't know north from south, east from west, and in my view anyway. And then you add in the LSD and the drugs on top of that, and then you really, whatever, whatever few of them might have be remaining, you just wipe the rest of them out with and you, of course, you sell it to them by telling them, this is enlightenment and you're going to become one with God, and it'll burst open the doors of perception and you'll be really cool and all the rest of it. Like, but really what's happening is it's turning into a the saliva is dripping out of the both corners of your mouth, and you can't hold down a job anymore. You stop washing, perhaps, and you're babbling incoherently. You can't string a sentence together, and you can't get your thoughts together, and it's kind of labeled somehow as cool. But that was very successfully rolled out, like, and that wiped out vast swathes of American youth culture in the 60s and 70s and onward. We're still feeling the effects of it today. Like, it was a cultural bomb. It was like a cultural nuke. Here, have some of this. Like, and it just goes to show how frail the social perception is, because they constantly prey on this thing where people will kind of they think in a kind of herd scenario, so one follows the other, and it does have it has its effect, like.
Yeah, and listen, there's a key moment in all that is very understated, in my opinion,
Mm,
that shows how the replacement of a previous religion, and when I say religion, I'm talking more about worldview per se, in the West than just a formal religion. But there was a key moment there which transitioned from one false worldview to another, a new mask of that false worldview, which was Jesus Christ Superstar, which is a brilliant musical achievement, in my opinion. I mean, it's really brilliantly done. But what it did there was exactly to, in a way, it did musically what Darwin did in the scientific sphere, right? So it was that was the moment when it was okay, it was acceptable to let go of the previous religious view, okay, and adopt this new age, as you were saying, in this new idea um, of of um, of religious thought and so on. And again, I emphasize, I'm not saying that the previous was true. I am saying that this was a replacement of a false with another false, and this is something because it's again that knee-jerk thing that we've been discussing in the past conversations that were so controversial, apparently, is that the fact that one thing in front of you is false doesn't mean that the thing it's trying to replace was true, and doesn't mean that you have to go and defend that other false behind you because it's being attacked. You understand? So um, I think it was really, if you look at that era where Jesus Christ Superstar came out, it was really a key turning point, which no pun intended, in that social engineering towards that replacement of religion slash ideology in the mass society. I think in the West, of course.
Um, just to fast forward a tiny bit, we'll say even into the time I grew up, I suppose in the 90s. And I was looking at an interview there recently with a guy. He's a sound engineer by the name of Andy Wallace. And Andy Wallace is pretty famous. He's a big name in the music industry. And he, for example, recorded and produced. You heard of a guy called Jeff Buckley? Jeff Buckley was a singer
Yeah,
songwriter who had an
he did
album. He
that
had an
famous
album,
cover,
great
didn't he?
album called Grace. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, Andy Wallace produced and recorded, mixed that album Grace, which is Jeff Buckley's sort of one and only. Well, I think it was one of two albums he made before he died. In sort of very unusual circumstances. He drowned in the Wolf River, which is a tribute to the Mississippi River near Memphis, and his body was found some 6 days later uh, near Beale Street in Memphis. And so anyway, the point I'm trying to make is Andy Wallace mixed that album for Jeff Buckley, but he also mixed Sepultura, were a Brazilian kind of thrash metal band who I actually really like as well. And he mixed a whole bunch of bands like Rage Against the Machine, Linkin Park, and like lots and lots of kind of really well known Slayer. Actually, Slayer, very famous kind of thrash band
Mhm.
from back in the day. So he worked on all these albums, and he was connected to a producer who's worked with people like Metallica, whose name is Richard Rubinstein, I think is his name. He goes by the name
Rick
Rick
Rubin.
Rubin. Rick
Yeah.
Rubin, right?
Mhm.
And this so the general point I'm trying to make is, and actually he Andy Wallace worked on Nevermind. He mixed Nevermind, which was Nirvana's, I think it was their biggest commercially successful album. Obviously Smells Like Teen Spirit and all these big hits for Nirvana were on that Nevermind album. So Andy Wallace, this one guy was involved in all this material. And as I said, in through Rick Rubin. And the point I'm trying to make is that how centralized, like you look at these massive, huge records from that era, and it's just one guy is getting to mix them all. And you're like, how could that be? And it just goes to show how connected and how small, when you really get up the food chain, you're dealing with a very few people really who are sort of on the inside track of managing all this thing. So the actual management, the big four record labels and the internal management in there is actually quite small. They're handling these artists, and in a lot of cases, they literally kind of own these artists. Like in this case of Jeff Buckley, case in point, he's, if you pardon the expression, his arse was owned by the record label. I think for in the early part of his career. and he signed a publishing deal and a like a record deal, two different deals at the same time, which was like a double jeopardy scenario for it. Was like it'd be like if you had two mortgages going at the same time. So after his first album, Grace, he was in like $1 million in debt, and he was in dire straits. And there's lots of rumors online that may have played a part in how he died. The narrative states that he died accidentally, but there's also there's rumors around how he died, but not to get into too much bogged down. That the general point I want to make is that you're looking at a mechanism and a network and a kind of how do I say it? The machinery of the industry is very small. You're dealing with a very, very few people and very powerful people.
It's gatekeeping essentially, and this takes me to my next question. There's an individual called Mark Devlin, and he argues that he's got several books, by the way. One of his books is titled "Nobody's Dad's a Plumber." It's because when you look into all of these individuals, none of them come from, even though they may claim they come from the working class, they don't. I mean, the
Yeah.
most notable example of recent years is that of Ed Sheeran. Claimed that he was a
Mm,
busker, he was
mm,
homeless. When you actually look into his background, his parents were, art curators, museum curators. They were, in with the industry. They were, of course, well off. He went to a private school,
yeah.
private preparatory school. So it was more a bohemian transience
Mm,
rather than, uh, his actual life in the organic working class. He had the financial safety net there. So what you're seeing here is um, these people are the talent itself. They're treated as a sort of security risk, and this is probably why in the early days they wanted the military brat, because they had the right psychological
mm,
um, psychological conditioning. Effectively, they were perfect candidates for the lifetime actors, right? And thus, they were the way that they were brought up in those sorts of military households. Perhaps they were from intelligence families as well. Um, they were raised in perhaps highly controlled environments, so therefore they were less of a security risk. They were far more um, um, adaptive to the culture creation industry. They were less of a security risk as well. So my question is thus: um, this idea of the sort of starving artist and a lot of the musicians that, and I was one of them as well. Of course, we all were, who uh, invested God knows how many tens of thousands in trying to make it as a musician, only to sort of hit a brick wall when you get to that point. Um, what I'm asking is it that highly controlled? Is there any chance for breakthrough acts at all,
I,
or
I,
do you
I
have
do.
to be controlled?
I believe that there is, and I definitely like. I've been listening to PJ Harvey, for example, recently. She's English singer. She's been around for I don't know for how long, 20 years now, maybe more. But I think she's a great artist. I think she's made some great stuff, and I think she's the real deal. And like now, how much is of her output is controlled? It has to be controlled to a point, you see, because the label is behind her. And we would never have heard of her if the label hadn't come in behind her. So there's money there, and where there's money, there's connection. So then you can argue, yeah, that there has to be always control when the label is involved and when money is involved. But that's not to say there's great artists in the mix of all that, which there are. Her being a case in point. And I would argue, not ironically, that someone like perhaps George Michael, the late kind of pop star, was a great artist in his own right, doing his own kind of music. I know it's pop music or whatever, but he's a case in point. He was tied in with Sony, and he couldn't get out of the deal. They had a record deal with him, and he wanted to move away from the kind of crass pop music he was writing, and he wanted to write an album that had a lot more depth. He was interested in jazz music, and there was a lot more going on with the guy than just being a pop singer, right? So he wanted to make this album, which eventually was the name of the album title. Like the song "Older" is on the album I'm talking about. But to make a long story short, he had a huge battle with Sony, and eventually he managed to break free, and then he was able to make this album that he wanted to make. So the point being, in that scenario, you're looking at people that are basically in financial hock, and they're largely owned, they're largely assets. They're essentially lifetime employees of the corporation, and they can't get out of it because, as I understand, in a lot of their cases, their house is owned, the people around them are owned, what they're going to be doing for the next 6 months to 8 months, if they have to go on a tour or record a record, all that's controlled. So it's essentially they are owned assets. Um, and likewise, I think that extends to people in the movie business, actors as well. But we stick to the case in point with the music stuff.
Yes, I would like to say two things about that. One is, after a certain threshold, yes, there are musicians that can be noticed by their talent, but after a certain threshold, they either play ball or they drop the ball
Yeah.
on them. So I
Mm.
think it's one of those aspects. And the other is that this transition that I was talking about, where gradually more and more you saw the idea that it was possible to not be a musician and still record albums and be successful. And even the music itself degenerated. I mean, it lost quality.
Mm.
Let's be honest about it. Over the years, in general, what we're talking about, the mainstream music. And I think that was already a preparation for getting rid of the artists, which is what
Yeah.
we see now with AI, right? So we
Yeah.
were conditioned to, you listen to an AI track, and given in comparison to the last, let's say, 30 years of music, it sounds reasonable, right? But that doesn't
Mm.
mean that it is good in the way that actual musicians would make it good. And so
Yeah.
there was also that preparation, let's say, for getting rid of the artist. So the labels, which are themselves controlled, the labels aren't sovereign by any means, in my
Yeah.
opinion, but the labels would actually be able to produce music without musicians, right?
Yeah.
Without
Yeah.
having to rely on, will this guy produce a hit, or will this guy be able to sing on that day, or will this, all these factors that perhaps counted a lot in what were, for example, like we talked about the Beatles and Frank Zappa and Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix and so on. Will these guys be able to maintain, or um, can we downgrade the level to a point where we can actually produce music without relying on the talent, right? And of
Mm.
course, if you just put some handsome or gorgeous performers dancing around in underwear while lip syncing, for example, and who the fuck knows who's singing behind that. Um, that's done. That performs, that sells, that creates the pull, and it was all conditioned to be that way. And now, if some
Yeah.
um, of the music, like there's been some, Spotify was making AI music and so on. Yeah, but who actually noticed in comparison to what was there, to what was in the musical environment for the last 30 years, gradually, who actually noticed? And that is the actual problem. You understand? It's that
Yeah.
they don't need the artists anymore. In fact, you know.
Mm. And another just very interesting kind of spin off your point there, Armin, is this kind of notion of the ear, the social ear, what do people want to hear at a given period of time has changed from, say, 1920 to the 1950s to the 1970s to now, for example. So what, the taste, what is considered popular taste is changing all the time. So I think you were hinting at it there, Armunn, is that by getting rid of the artist and this ties in with this sort of Taylor Swiftism kind of scenario where you have this, you're moving towards the mono song, where the song of the future, in the future, every song will sound the same. It will be the same song. There will only be one song, and the social ear is gradually being conditioned to not be able to accept anything that's outside a certain kind of bell curve diameter or width. And what I mean by that is they won't have the palate, the actual taste buds, to take in anything other than something that's highly synthetic, highly normalized, kind of static, devoid of any deviance from a certain style, and will become like sort of Soviet era architecture, brutalism, like big, massive concrete blocks with straight lines going on forever and grey. And that's what I think this.
But also, and they also, and the ear also wants to be validated. It's what is popular. It doesn't matter if
Yeah,
listen, I worked as a DJ,
yeah,
and
Jesus,
I've
man, yeah.
observed this. I
Mm.
mean, you go off the field for a little bit, and people stare at you. It's
Yeah, and I totally concur with that. Sorry to jump in, Armin, but having
yeah,
played as a wedding band drummer all over Ireland back in the day, I don't do it anymore, but back in the day, I did it for a period of time. And there was a song at the time called "The Galway Girl," this horrific
yeah.
song,
Oh God, Ed Sheeran,
And
yeah.
Jesus Christ, this is Irish OIRISH nausea, just vomit-inducing kind of shamrogery of the worst type. So we travel up to Galway, up to Donegal, the north of Ireland, and they go, "Can you play the Galway Girl?" All right. Then we go down to Cork, the very south of Ireland, set up the drums, playing a gig. Next thing, "Can you play the Galway Girl?" Oh my God. Up to Dublin, the same thing on the east coast. Back over to County Clare, same thing. And you're like, how is this possible? Like, how has the entire island of Ireland suddenly, and like the set that they'd look for the exact same songs one after another. It was like they were it was like dealing with a cult or something, that people had been totally brainwashed. These were the only available, and it was everywhere you go they'd be the same. And I assume it's from the radio, that they're listening
Yeah,
to mainstream radio and or whatever's on TV or whatever. It's
But
just
this is
if
this is all
the
there's
they're
a if
getting,
there's a popular series that has a song as a theme or whatever, it also
Yeah,
counts. Yes. Go
oh
ahead,
yeah.
Sal.
I remember. I actually remember that. I remember Stranger Things when you had the sort of 80s revival and what was that one? The Kate Bush one running up that hill.
Oh Jesus, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That was in our repertoire, and I just remember we were playing it constantly at the time, and it got to the point I actually love that song, but now I
yeah,
hate it.
yeah,
Or I
yeah,
did love that song, but now I hate it. So it's just
Mm.
because you play the song so much, you become numb to it. But interestingly, this is what Theodore Adorno stated, and I'll read some of these quotes, and I just want to get your general take on this, and I think it ties in with what we were just discussing. So in his work on popular music, he states, quote, "The customers of musical entertainment are themselves objects or indeed products of the same mechanisms which determine the production of popular music. In other words, the fan is just as manufactured as the star." And then he
yeah,
goes, I won't read them
yeah,
all here, but he goes on to state, on pseudo individualization, the illusion of choice. By pseudo individualization, we mean endowing cultural mass production with the halo of free choice or open market on the basis of standardization itself. Standardization of song hits keeps the customers in line by doing their listening for them. Pseudo individualization, for its part, keeps them in line by making them forget what they listen to is wholly intended for them or pre-digested. And then he goes on to mention, by the way, this is the same idea as Orwell mentioned with the prole feed.
Yeah,
Anyway, he mentions this as well. So music today is largely social cement, and the
yeah,
meaning listeners attribute to a material, the inherent logic of which is inaccessible to them. The whole structure of popular music is standardized, even where the
yeah,
attempt is made to circumvent standardization. Standardization extends from the most general features to the most specific ones. Best
yeah,
known is the rule that the chorus consists of 32 bars and that the range is limited to one octave and one note.
yeah,
And so, do you have any opinions upon that, guys?
yeah. That's your mono song. Exactly what I was. He's right. That's the mono song. It's just totally standardized, shite, mass produced. No deviations, no originality. Like I've seen it myself in bands, the original bands that they play in, and the lads would turn around to me and say, "Look, everything's been done before." And they'd say every riff is already everything's and I'd be like, hang on a minute here, like that's not the case. I mean, there is such a thing as originality. Like if again, not to harp on about PJ Harvey too much or Jeff Buckley, but when I listen to those artists, for example, I can't hear anyone that sounds like them or anyone that writes like them. They were completely fingerprint artists that came up with their own stuff, or Susie and the Banshees, or early U2, or Meshuggah, or Alice in Chains. Like all those, or Helmet. I can think of so many. Thin Lizzy, Phil Lynott. So many bands I can think of that had their own sound. Miles Davis, jazz. Like no one sounds like these people. Buddy
Ed
Rich,
Sheeran.
John Bonham. These are original artists who made a statement. Okay, they might have built their sound on earlier, or they were influenced by people that came before them and listened to stuff, but they took those influences and made their own original statement. They took that, you know what I mean? So that's what I think they're trying to kill. That, like, that is a big problem in a kind of subterranean context from the point of view of managing society, because you're trying to eradicate that out of society, and that's why I think they're pumping this Taylor Swift garbage. And like the worrying thing is you begin to adjust the taste buds to acquiesce to that. As the fella said, Black Pilled. I used to listen to him a long time ago. After a while, it's good propaganda. That's why it's propaganda. You want to listen to it because it's good. It's good propaganda. So the TV program or the film or the news item or the piece of popular music, you can listen to it like it's entertaining. It draws you in, but it is mass produced kind of propaganda that's been set up for kind of spurious kind of hidden reasons. Like,
Yeah, it makes you feel validated too, because
yeah,
that mono song is like, Silas was quoting, the cement, the social cement, right? It's what
mm,
keeps you in this false identity. We were talking about false identity in the previous conversations, but that is a false identity that is built around culture, a culture that is false, that is produced to create a new group within
yeah,
those previous groups that were there. So absolutely, and the more, listen, you can choose nowadays. You can choose, and of course, there will always be, you know, unknown independent talent out there that you've never heard
yeah,
about.
yeah,
But nowadays, you can choose your type of mono song, right? It's not
yeah,
like everyone sounds like Taylor Swift. There's the
yeah,
Taylor Swift mono song. There's the rock mono song, which rock is actually a bit shaky right now. But there's these different genres. Each have a mono song, like what is acceptable, right? And this has to do, again, it's a repercussion of the ideological change that has been going in the background, which is the same framing of what is acceptable. It diminishes and diminishes and diminishes and diminishes. And of course,
mm,
if that happens
yeah,
ideologically, if you cut creativity in all of the fields, of course, art will also be a reflection of that, of course, and being as important as it is, because again, art is supposed to be one of the major manifestations of the love for life, right? And not just music, singing, painting, building things, whatever it is that you would consider a form of art, is a celebration of life. So it's a love of life. It's an act of love. And
Mm-hmm.
that has been completely stripped off, right? Because it's no
Yeah,
longer love, it's economics, as we were discussing
yeah,
in the previous conversation as well. So economics infiltrated every single aspect, including, of course, this. So that mono song is a reflection of the ideological changes behind as well, man.
yeah. And I suspect as well, and I might not be right in this, but I have a suspicion that for the artist right now who's trying to create, he or she, that process of creativity for them, by the time they come up with a product out of that process, that product may not reverberate or resonate with the society in the way that it potentially should or could. So that the process for them is much more, potentially much more difficult or constrained by the fact that the society around them is kind of resonating in this odd synthetic way. So
Yes.
it handicaps them, sort of thing, and not only kind of handicaps them, but it sort of might break down their natural flow of the energy, if you know what I mean, in that scenario, because the natural flow for the artist is to come out into a sort of a reasonably balanced society, but the flow is hitting off this synthetic wall, so that it's very difficult for them to potentially to come up with something that can live. So all their creations perhaps are stillborn, they're aborted, or they cannot conceive perhaps in the first place, to expand the metaphor. And maybe just maybe, an example of that is, again, to go back to PJ Harvey. She wrote a later album called Let England Shake, I think is the album title, Let England Shake. And I think a lot of the commentary she talked about the album being based around Britain, and its involvement in World War I and World War II and the horrors of warfare. And she was making really a larger statement about the power structure and the nefarious kind of dark actions of the power structure, not just Britain really, but the West, I suppose. But the point I'm trying to make is, I had a sense that when she made that album, she put a nail in her own coffin, so to speak,
Mm.
because she made a political album in an era sort of where politics of that nature and art were deeply uncool, because she
Yes.
misunderstood how far the sort of monoculture synthetic culture had progressed. And what she would, when she made that kind of statement, something that might have had worked perhaps in the 90s or the 80s, was not going to work now. And I think, and again, this is just my own projection, I think she may have spun out a bit on her own trajectory after that album. Even though
Mm.
earlier albums she'd made had been hugely successful, wonderful, amazing albums that totally grabbed the public mindset. But because she was following her artistic vision, number one, like trying to, hammer into new ground, trying not to repeat herself, trying to be creative, trying to be bold. And this is the territory she found herself in. But I think that album might have slammed into that wall of synthesis of what the world we see around us, and that then perhaps reflected back in her. I've heard she got like kind of writer's block, and she found it hard to maneuver after that little bit. So the wider point being that, not just to pick on her, but artists generally, perhaps are finding it hard to actually create, so that the muse, as it were, is not giving birth really in this with the way things are resonating now, perhaps.
No, I would summarize with something that actually have written years ago somewhere, which is the artist was supposed to organically be the one that produces what you need to hear or see, but it
Yeah,
has become the one that produces what you want to hear or
yeah,
see, right?
mm,
So there's this
yeah,
difference between what
yeah,
you
yeah,
need and
yeah,
what you want, right?
yeah,
Because how often was it that you listen to something that it's outside of what you want, it's outside of your comfort zone, right? And you listen and you go like, well, what the heck? And you even at first you're like hit with something, but you listen again and you understand that you actually needed that fresh perspective, right? You actually
Mm.
needed that new sound, or that if it's a literary work, oh, I actually needed to read this, whatever it is. But what's become is, now it's what you want. Oh, this is comfortable. Oh, this is comfortable.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah,
comfortable. And,
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
and it's all just the mono, like you said, right? So
Mm.
we are not exposed anymore by the
No,
artists, and not that it's their fault, of course, like we were saying.
no, I
But
don't think it is.
yeah, we're not exposed anymore to what we need, and they, as artists, envision what we need, but we are
Yeah,
exposed to what we want. Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. And just say, would you agree with that, Armin, that the artists in this time and era, that potentially it's much more difficult, if not impossible, for them to, naturally produce art as they would in a kind of reasonably balanced society? Do you think in this society it's more they're thwarted, or kind of stifled, or somehow, or kind of that the process for them is much more difficult?
Yeah, to make it big, for sure. You can still produce, but you have to expect not to have the recognition of your talent as perhaps in an organic manner you would, right? So to make it big, for sure, I think it's nearly, not
Well,
nearly, it's
but
outright
let me
impossible.
kind of slightly rephrase the question. Do you think that the public are even capable now of recognizing a good piece of art? And if not, then like what is a good piece of art really? If something is a good song, has artistic merit, and if nobody can recognize it as such, then it's like, what's the sound in the woods sort of thing if no one can hear it or whatever? How do you is the society lost its capacity to recognize a good piece of art? And if so, maybe the whole process is just kind of falling apart, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, en masse, of course. It's like, I consider us in a way to be artists, and we're having a conversation here. How many people of the entire world population will listen to this conversation, or have listened to the previous conversations we've had over the years, right? How many?
Mm,
Not many,
mm,
but that doesn't mean that we stopped producing, quote unquote, our art of exposing the ideas that we have, and so on and so forth. Of course, if we had a series of conversations, podcast style, that was all within a certain framework, even
mm,
YouTube would make it their mission to promote us to the top ranking of listenership, right? But we don't do
mm,
that, and we still do it. So I think that will always exist. But it's like one of the things that I was saying, Silas, previous to we started recording, is that the system controls all the cameras and all the microphones, right? So you can be
mm,
playing there in that corner. When I say playing, is playing, talking, whatever it is, they're in that corner, but the cameras and the microphones are all turned this way, right? So
mm,
yeah, I mean, go ahead, knock yourself out. Yeah, do your art. You have like 3, 4 guys listening or whatever. It's fine. Not a threat, not a bother. It's fine. You have your valve there, and the people that listen to you, those 4 or 5, it's fine. It's okay. But if they really wanted, if let's say, if the cameras and the microphones were organic, probably they would be turned at you, because they would say, oh, there's talent there, let's look, but that's not how the system works. The system curates what is your taste. It
mm,
curates what is good, quote unquote, right? It curates what is considered acceptable, even, right? And that's in all fields, even in conversation, right? So conversations, music, literature, etc. So um, I think that it will always exist. To be honest, I think there will always be people like you, me, Silas, etc., that will do their own thing, but we will rarely hear about them, except through a synchronicity, a guidance of an inner
yeah.
authority, like we've been talking about. which is probably what brought us here in the first place. So to have this conversation, a series of synchronicities that made us find each other. But apart from that, en masse, no, it will no longer be a thing as it was possible in the past. But it will continue to exist. If you call it in the underground, it will continue to exist outside of the cameras and the microphones.
Well,
I
sorry. Oh, go on ahead, Silas. Sorry.
no, please, Zeal.
Well, no, look, just to finish try and finish the point, I suppose. Again, not to pick on those two artists, but just as for kind of reference, PJ Harvey, Jeff Buckley, the albums that they made, Jeff Buckley's album Grace, for example, and PJ Harvey's album Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea, they're both sort of, I think, early to mid 90s albums, and there's a certain feeling or spirit in around those albums that is, it's conjoined to that era and a certain feeling that people had at that time. And I've seen this in kind of comment sections and some of the narrative and the criticism, around these albums, particular albums. And the wider point I'm trying to make is that I think now, like, to sustain those albums, that musical output, that spirit had to exist in the society. So those albums were, and I've heard this word used before, relevant. This is a real A&R man word. Is your music relevant at this time? So so they were relevant at that time because that spirit existed in the people, in the society, the zeitgeist. Whereas now, by conversely, by comparison, the zeitgeist spirit is not, it's very distorted, and it's very sort of angular and
Right.
sort of mercurial. No one really knows what to make of it. It's,
Would
so,
you
so
say
I
it's
suppose,
fractured? That
I beg, yeah, exactly. Fractured
yeah,
is a great word, yeah.
I would agree.
So I suppose that you can't have such an album or such an output, really. No,
Yes, yes. You may not even record the album, but one
exactly.
of the things that doesn't mean that you don't have the art in you and you don't output it in some way. But what I
Well,
was trying to
this
say,
is what and I don't mean to jump across your arm, but this is what I'm getting to, right? If you have the artistic impulse in you, do you need that zeitgeist in order to produce it in that way? Are they somehow all connected? This is because I suspect they may be.
well, if, for example, if we're having this conversation, is because we observe the zeitgeist, and by that observation, we have something to say that is not in accordance with.
Yes,
So I think
yes.
that will always exist even in the musical sphere. The thing is, of course, I mean, we will not quote unquote record an album of conversations or be
Mm,
in the number one podcasts or whatever, but we still do what we do, right? And I
yeah,
think that will continue to exist. But another thing that we also have to take into consideration is because even it links back to the previous conversation. I mean, do we need to have a unified validation, like oh, this album is universally considered great? Do we
yeah,
need that? Because that goes against again to those false identities of it could be supranational, or this album is really good for this nation. So for example, I don't know, the what they're called, the Dubliners, would probably be considered, oh yes, in Ireland everyone likes the Dubliners, right? I don't know if this is the case, but um or the Pogues. Perhaps it's
mhm,
more um, you know, uh, because this is if you're an Irish, do you have to like the Dubliners or the Pogues? No, no, because that is a false identity per se. So we don't need that unifying validation per se. But art can exist to smaller tribes, or organically or not, but preferably organic, and I hope that, for example, people that would listen to this conversation and that would enjoy this conversation, that perhaps would have something to comment when it's published, that those people actually relate to what we're saying, and are not just consuming a conversation for the sake of, the same way that you would listen to the mono song, because this isn't a mono song, right? So in that regard, I think it will always, in my opinion, Zeal, it will always be there, but it will not be in the public eye. It will not be in the places where you normally have gotten used to find music.
This takes me to another question I've just sort of formulated in my head here. And I was looking up regarding Taylor Swift while you guys were talking, and the notion of the mono song. It's also known as the Jack Antonoff effect. And funnily enough, in both the New York Times and the Guardian, um, Taylor Swift was actually described as the last monoculture star. And
Mhm.
it's interesting. So I'll read off a few of these interesting little things that I've just found here. So there was a study by the Spanish National Research Council which analysed 500,000 recordings and found that since 1955, timbral diversity has peaked and dropped, and pitch transitions have become significantly less complex. Um, Effectively, this is probably due to the sort of Milli Vanilli, um, I guess you would call it, cultural turning point or inflection point where the artist stopped creating the music and the producer had more, uh, he had more sway in the editing of the music, of course, but you saw producers that were actually starting to become artists. So you saw that in the likes of Calvin Harris, David Guetta. There was several of them at the time, and of course Jack Antonoff. And what we see with Jack Antonoff and the Jack Antonoff effect is effectively the homogenization of pop music and the illusion of choice that is effectively creating a pre-packaged sound, a commercialized sound for Spotify specifically. So, he's worked with the likes of Taylor Swift, of course, Lana Del Rey, Lorde, Katy Perry, St. Vincent, and basically this guy, I've actually watched a few videos of this guy, and he uses the same sort of retro synth sound. He uses the same sort of chord progression with that synth as well. It'll always be sort of mid-tempo, it'll be a very passive sound as well. It won't be very active, it won't be jarring. So effectively what you're doing is you're creating a sound that could seamlessly be interjected, or introduced into playlists, right? Streaming playlists. So you have that, but it's weird with AI music now because you no longer need to contort and conform people's um, or streamline people's musical tastes anymore in this way. This with this sort of mono song. Whatever you want to listen to, you simply just prompt the AI to to create that song, to bring you that song on demand. So therefore, you can actually generate money. You can generate culture creation through a completely fractured market in that sense. Um, and again, this leads us to the same idea, which is what they're attempting to enhance is the illusion of choice, firstly, and moreover as well, what Aldous Huxley stated, the painless concentration camp. So those two things are always at the fore of the culture creation, not necessarily the profit. What do you guys have any opinions upon that? As Taylor Swift, the sort of last of these monocultural stars.
I absolutely agree. I think that she was groomed to be exactly that, to be the last. I mean, you usually talk about the last man, right? She is the last, I mean, artist, if you want to
Well,
put it like the
she
last.
could be a man. We don't actually know, but please continue.
Let's not call mystery now. But so the last musician, massive music, mass musician. Let's put it like that. Perhaps it would be the best or popular musician, because I think that after Taylor Swift, it will be mostly AI based in the mass, okay, in the massive music industry. Outside of it, I think that musicians will continue to exist, creativity will continue to exist, but unless you stumble upon it or some synchronicity brings you there, you will not find it. It's not. It will not. The microphones and the cameras are turned to the other way. But I absolutely agree with that because it unify people of all of different backgrounds, different cultures, perhaps even different religions, under the taste, if you like, of a single artistic career, right? And then, of course, you have to lead them to the next gate, right? And the next gate, I think, is the mono song that Zeal was talking about. And that's why he said Taylor Swift. I mean, it's obvious that Taylor Swift has become that. But the next gate will be AI, and we have been prepared for that for quite some time. I think that they knew AI would be able to produce eventually music like it has, and but our taste had to be downgraded to a point where that music becomes not only acceptable, but in one generation, perhaps even if so much, becomes the mainstream, the absolute, what people will actually consider good, right? And they will consider it so good that perhaps those people, when they listen to an actual instrument played live, they will feel awkward. There will be a sort of dissonance in their in their brains, like what is this? Is this that this doesn't it's not quantized, and it's not
Yeah.
it doesn't have the exact structure, and etc etc. So, but absolutely, I think it's to unify and then lead across the next gate, which is that mono song AI kind of
They did
music. Absolutely.
experiment with the drums, moving from the disco era forward into quantization, and I suppose, even though click tracks are a tool in the studio, but generally speaking, they were producing music from probably, the 70s onwards, where the actual drum tracks, the acoustic drum tracks were like the timing was machine timing, essentially. And an early proponent of that was actually Steely Dan, because Donald Fagen and Walter Becker were notorious studio musicians. They had the best session musicians in America working
Mhm.
for them. They broke people. They made people do multiple takes because they were looking for perfection. And we recorded that album Asia. They gave the Grammy to the drum machine, because what they ended up doing was, no matter how good the musician they couldn't get the drum tracks exactly the way they wanted it, because there was too much humanity sort of in the track when they get the organic track. So what they ended up doing was taking the organic drum track and sort of hybridizing it with basically a drum machine. So essentially, you got a kind of you know you got literally got a kind of a biodigital convergent drum track with this hybrid human drum machine thing, and that's why they gave their Grammy was given to the actual drum machine. And moving forward, then you into disco and into the modern age, you've got people are becoming more and more accustomed to perfect time, or machine time at least. And as you said, just to echo your point there, so if anything now is outside of that, people's ears, it jars with them, because they become tuned to hearing that, like, so, and anything outside it is like they can't handle it, like. And just
Mhm.
like, I think Taylor, if you write a bland enough piece of music, like if it's so bland and bloodless and just cardboard, dry cornflakes, lack of any type of soul whatsoever. If you can write that real mono song, the universe will implode around you. Everything will disintegrate, and matter, the fabric of space time, will just collapse in on top of itself. And Taylor Swift has come very close to that with her song "I'm Going to Saskatchewan." That song, I think, is as close as we could get to a sort of a weapon to destroy the universe. It's the worst tripe I've ever heard in my life. I'm going to Saskatchewan, she says, as if it's like, it sounds like an ad for like a TV advert for some bland kitchen appliance or something. It's horrific. But thanks for that, Taylor.
You also have the same illusion of struggle with her, but of course it's from the sort of female teeny bopper perspective, and all of these songs that she's written are from all the diary entries that she's meticulously made after each successive breakup, or she's well into her 30s now, but she still is a sort of perpetual adolescent writing in her high school journal about the breakup here and the gossip there. And so again, it really just shows the sort of pre-packet. It actually shows seeing the era of the sort of this mass quantization and digitization of the music, and the stealing of the humanity from the song. Really, what they're putting a lot of emphasis now on on the value of the artist as a celebrity, rather on the value of the song itself, because they know the song itself is so bland. It doesn't have enough dimensionality and layers to it that you could actually sell it. So fundamentally, what they're selling now are these reality TV stars,
Yeah.
the musical artists, right? That's what they're selling. They're
And this
selling
Yeah,
is
but
like this
falsehood.
this is Katy Perry is now gone out with feckin' Justin Trudeau, like the Canadian ex whatever he was, Prime Minister, like it's fiasco territory. Like, have I got that right? It's Katy Perry going out with Trudeau. Am I right in
Yeah.
saying that? I believe the term for that, Silas, is a wig. I think that's the
A wig, yes,
CIA term.
that's it. Yeah, yeah,
Am I right?
yeah.
Have you heard that one before?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
Yeah.
what in fact, we call them that here. For example, Elton John had many wigs. I'm not just talking about the two-piece that he was wearing, but he had wives that were covers.
Yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, but actually, Silas, I think you were saying that the worship now is directed to the celebrity, but I
Mhm.
think that is again a transition because, like we were talking about, Taylor Swift will be the last mass celebrity. And after that, people will, and I mean, you can laugh all you want, but people will worship AI celebrities. People will worship Sim 1s. Have you ever seen the movie Sim 1?
I believe I have actually. Yeah, it rings a bell.
Yeah, with
Rings a bell.
Al Pacino. Yeah, I mean, watch that movie. I'll post a link to the IMDb and you look it up. But that movie is basically Al Pacino is a director, um, and he had a fiasco. He's got debts, and the studio, who is his the CEO of the studio or the director of the studio, whatever, is his ex-wife, and she cancels his contract because he's a fiasco, right? And what he says is, okay, this is because the artists have the actors, in this case, a particular actress played by Winona Ryder, um, are ruling the directors. So the directors have to pamper to all the whims of these actresses and actors and so on. So he receives a disk with a computer program that designs the actress that he wants, doing exactly as he wants, and he uses that actress to make movies, and the movies are a success, right? And everyone worships this actress that only appears in interviews, in remote interviews, because he can't produce her live, right? She only appears on TV screens, but people worship this actress that then goes also to record an album and has a live concert that is a hologram, right? That is a projected hologram, and people all around the world worship Sim1, thinking that her name is Simone, but the name of the program was Sim1. And at the end, even the studio, even his ex-wife, when she realizes the truth, takes him back, renews his contract, and he continues to do as if she's an organic person,
Mhm.
and that continues, right? And of course, here is, the population is fooled by AI, but I will tell you that people will know it's AI and will still
Yeah.
deal with that artificial creation as if it was a person.
Well, this is like the movie that came out when I was I think I'd just left school. Perhaps I can't quite recall now. It was Ready Player One, and so what you're seeing is pre-programming. You're seeing a slow social priming. We're basically marinating in all of this programming, this conditioning to such a degree that, well, there will be no sort of pushback at all against it. And we're already seeing it actually in South Korea. They're already using, um, not on a large scale. I mean, they're not turning them into celebrities and stars quite yet, but it's getting to that point. In South Korea, they're using, instead of using human models, they're now just using AI models, for example. And
Mhm.
it's a far more streamlined process when you move to a pure stakeholder economy as well, and you have that lower down corporate stakeholder class who they actually are the ones who care about profit, and that's the mechanism that keeps them, effectively, uh, uh, running their own hamster wheel within their social stratum. They There's a fiduciary responsibility and a fiduciary principle they work under, and so they want everything to be as cookie cutter as possible, because to them
Mm.
it's all a predictability game.
Yeah.
Profit and predictability are effectively, bed buddies, right? In the commercial sense to them. So of course they don't want to take any chances on a wild card, right? And human beings are wild cards because again, you have that sort of essence of the human in there, the spirit, that thing which can't be uh, predicted by algorithm or controlled by algorithm. That can always act in weird and wonderful ways that may harm their interests. There's something else that I want to ask regarding. Um, you see the same thing with Madonna, though it was completely false. But it was most pronounced with Katy Perry. And Katy Perry, her real name is Kate Hudson. I mean, we could go into why she chose the Katy Perry name. Supposedly, it's her mother's maiden name, but anyway, getting away from the esoteric, she was the pastor's daughter. That was her backstory. And so, what you see is she goes from the pastor's daughter to this sort of, well, she actually plays a robot. She played a robot on a lot of her tours, this sort of controlled, uh, almost, well, similar to this sort of Simone character, right? She looked robotic, and that was part of her stage performance, of course, all controlled. Do you think that was also part of the pre-programming package towards this AI future, not just with AI models, but AI
Yeah,
music, everything that's synthetic?
yeah, everything and even in the movie industry, when you see
Mhm.
movies that are more CGI than actual acting, um, you already see that transition. It's to accommodate or to get people to be familiarized with how a movie should look. And that's why, some people gravitate to older movies because they see the grain, they see the actor, they see the lighting, they see everything. But most people nowadays as well are unable to see an old movie and be entertained because they will find it's boring and it doesn't have all the flashy um, CGI
Yeah.
things that they've grown accustomed to, right? So it is a transition, absolutely. towards a preparation, a transition, whatever you want to call it, absolutely towards that digitalized fabric of our imagination as well. And but I think again that the actual artists will continue to exist even if you don't notice them, even if you don't know about them. But yes, in the mass eye, in the masses eye, it has been prepared that way for sure, and that was part of it.
What are your
Yeah.
opinions on that, Zeal?
I don't know, just sort of like they're an interesting um, juxtaposition, if you will. Katy Perry and Madonna, like Katy Perry from the modern era they're like growing overnight. They're like mushrooms. They grow up in damp conditions and they're not there today. And you come back in the morning and they're sprouting up in the garden. She's like kind of a hyper modern. I don't want to use the word. I use the word artist advisedly. Like she's a hyper modern sort of uh, pop sensation, like kind of overnighter kind of thing, came out of nowhere and kind of suddenly is plastered absolutely everywhere, ubiquitous, and even and you can't escape, and now she's got out with Trudeau. It's kind of strange kind of trajectory. Whereas if you compare her to Madonna, an artist from say 80s, early 90s, whenever those artists or those kind of pop stars there was an awful lot more put into them. There was a huge amount of putting them up on a mass scale pedestal, that there were kind of global pop stars who we'd seen them progress over 10, 15 years and growing and changing and changing their image and different output and whatever. But the scale that was in those older pop stars was huge. Whereas now you have something that's very quick and very sort of completely shallow, just a veneer, and completely disposable and throwaway, kind of there for a flash in the pan, and completely there's no legacy, there's no heritage, there's no sort of establishment about them, in that sense. So there are a lot more uh, you know how do you say it, more kind of pay as you go, or more kind of what did they say in logistics? Just in time. They're kind of the just in time pop artists, So there's a huge change there, and that probably accounts as well for not just popular taste, but the media and the medium, and how the stuff is presented, and how it's trying to keep up with this sort of hyper paced youth culture that's the conformist, normalized youth culture that needs product that's generated quickly, that's colorful, flashy. You're not looking for any kind of depth. You're not looking to develop a character. You're not looking to develop sort of anything. You're not looking for heritage. That's something that's going to last over, 20 years. You're looking for just to hit now and then to be forgotten about quickly, and move on to something else. So you will see this as well, I assume, with the Taylors and the Katys, that they're very much going to be generated on a kind of a conveyor belt, and when they're gone down the line, we'll have sort of forgotten about them, and there won't be a whole lot of, they won't be releasing a best of as such, or a classic hits, or final word, not necessarily in the same way as those older artists. So there's a big change there as well in how they're presented.
Well,
Also, as well, please, Armunn, please.
No, I was going to say that there's also another aspect to it, which is, I mean, when people talk about the virtual reality, right? That we'll be living in a virtual reality, and it will be proposed, and it will be sort of like the Matrix, and etc. No, the virtual reality is that people will have will not live any organic experience, will not live any organic life, and their life experience is lived by surrogate through these celebrities, right? So the celebrity dates this one, so they date that one. So it's like if they were living the love affair, right? And the celebrity breaks up with that one, so they break up. It's like a surrogate kind of a kind of existence. You understand? Because in their organic lives, they don't have love and partnership and breakup and sorrow, and that is all eradicated, right? And so the virtual reality is actually this surrogate kind of living, which these avatars of sorts,
Yeah.
collective avatars, who now are still played, supposedly, I don't know, but who now are still played by real people, eventually will be
Mm,
played by AI people, whatever
mm,
you want to call them. And they will be the same surrogate self, as we've been seeing, people that live. It's as if they actually knew the person, right? As if they actually it was themselves that were going through that life. You understand? So there's this component as well, and that is why, of course, you need to reduce it to the smallest common denominator, because you have to make sure that the greater number of people relate to that celebrity as
Mhm.
possible, right?
yeah.
So someone has to have, not someone, the greatest number of people have to have something they identify with, so that they live through, as if that's a surrogate experience that they're having, living through that person, that
And
perceived person.
yeah,
Yeah.
and as well, there's sort of a weaponization as well. So it's like with this Katie Trudeau thing, like what you've done now is you've taken this crass overnight pop entity and paired that entity up with like a senior political person, in Canada, the president. And it's like if you said that was happened in 1992, I mean, it would cause a global outcry that you had a overnight pop star suddenly was in a relationship with the president of Canada. It'd be sort of, it'd raise eyebrows. But now what we have there is we have acceptance and normalization of Trudeau himself as a political entity because he's allied with Katy Perry. Now, does it just as a, you
And
know what I
because,
mean? So
and also,
you've used
I'm
her
sorry,
as an
and also
entity.
because the politicians have themselves become celebrities in the same way. I mean, look at
Yes,
Trump.
yes, yes.
So that threshold was crossed before. But go on. Sorry.
Just a footnote, right? A new word that came into my vocabulary, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's hypocorism. Hypocorism, I think. Hypocorism or hypocorism. But a hypocorism, there's clever stuff going on with people's names in the psychological warfare, social engineering camp. And I'll tell you what I mean. If I told you the lady's name was Kathleen Perry, we go Kathleen is formal. So like, but when we use the informal, which is what a hypocorism is, a kind of a shortened version of the name, it's Katie. It's friendly, and Katie
Mhm.
has been denoted by an inner clique of individuals who are friendly with Katie, and we by
Right.
default using that term, Katie, are also sort of in the friendly clique group, and we ourselves are friendly with Katie. So I see these use of hypocorisms a lot in this kind of stuff. Another example
Well,
of it is
but yeah.
Joseph Rogan. Who's Joseph Rogan? Well, you've heard that podcaster Joe Rogan. Like
Yeah.
no one knows Joseph Rogan, but we're all friends with Joe because
Yeah.
Joe's our buddy, right? Same with the Nirvana drummer. It's not David Grohl, who know, but it's Dave because Dave's our friend. So we get these hypocorisms an awful lot with these types of characters where we get these shortened, buddy, friendly kind of shortened versions of their names, which I think is a sure sign of someone to be very wary of. And I've seen it as well actually in workplaces on a different note. But when if it's Katie, these shortened, friendly kind of hypocritisms that I think it's a stealth psychological warfare thing to seed in that these are friendly people, these are one of us, these are our crowd, and oh, you don't know Katie, you don't know Joe. We hang out with Joe and Katie. We're friends with Joe and Katie. Do you want to join our gang? If you want to be hip, you got to be hip with Joe and Katie and Justin and the gang. So it's just a clever little thing that he did.
Well spotted and brilliant. Brilliant. I will keep that, and I will shamelessly
Yeah.
steal that, because
Bill,
that.
who's William Clinton? It's Bill. Bill's our buddy. We drink
Yeah.
beers with Bill. We play
What do you
We go
think
to
about
the
that?
football on Sunday.
What do you think about that, Siley?
Sile. The Silester. Hey, the Silester.
Siley,
Hey.
Siley, what do you think about that?
Or it could be Sal.
Sal,
Sal.
Sal.
In fact, that was something that was done quite a lot
Bill.
in the
Bill
mafia
Gates.
as
William
well.
Gates. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
right. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. It's done that. By the way, that's also done in Ireland. Ireland has that weird thing where they will call
Yeah,
politicians by their first names.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
just I've never understood that. But again,
yeah.
it creates that artificial familiarity,
Yeah.
which
Charlie
really
was.
they're
Yeah, Charlie
yeah,
and Bertie. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Everyone
yeah.
and they do it a lot, and you don't notice it. And it's like if someone says to you, "Well, what do you think of Joe Rogan?" And you go, "Joseph Rogan," and they're going, "No, Joe. Well, I don't call him Joe. He's Joe. To me, he's Joseph. I've heard of him, but it's Joe. Why are you calling him Joe? You don't know him. Is your buddy? Do you play football
Great
together,
point.
or go darts, or fly fishing, or what? How come you're like, you know what I mean? And they do this all the time. This is just manipulation, like Will Bill
Excellent
Gates,
point.
William Gates.
Yeah.
They do it a lot.
Hmm. Yeah, it's also is something else I wanted to ask. A few other things actually is that so pop culture is a sort of pacifier, and you sent me that. Where was that? I don't know what movie that's from. Under the Silver Lake, is that the name of the movie?
Yes.
That songwriter scene.
Yeah.
I was just reading the subtitles there while you guys were speaking, and um, so the songwriter he tells Sam he appears to be this old man who's written all. He states this quote: "I'm the voice of your generation. You were rebelling to my music." And then he mentions within this scene that the cool and the rebellious effectively are all manufactured currencies. And
Yeah,
Yeah.
by providing the youth with a prepackaged soundtrack for their anger, the elite, of course, the songwriter here, can thus neutralize the threat of actual revolution by effectively preempting it and
yeah,
smoothing it out into that already pre-digested form, and that takes the sting out of the potential revolution or rebellion. So the music is as he states here, quote, a shell of other men's ambitions, unquote, specifically
yeah,
the ambition to maintain power. And
yeah,
in that, in terms of that idea, we see, for example, again from Theodor Adorno in the Frankfurt School, um, that he wrote extensively on music's power to enforce conformity, as we've already read, partially. Now, if this sort of speaks to the wider idea of celebrity culture as well and what we've been discussing, but if cultural Marxism, as discussed by the Frankfurt School and Adorno and the rest of them, Mark
mm,
Hughes and all of this, if it is to dismantle Western society, right, to
mm,
hollow it out, how does that sort of specific promotion of atonal or dissonant sounds, energies, behaviors as well, right? Remember what we're seeing, this sort of oh, this celebrity's dating this celebrity and they'll date for like a couple of years, but it's nothing long term. And
mm,
oh, this celebrity's divorcing this, so it's you end up becoming it's like hyper individualism or hyper atomization, in other words. Um, So how does that serve to fragment the human psyche and create the sort of schizophrenic, capricious culture in which we exist today? Do you think that has an effect on it? Of course, the music as well, but the celebrity cultures, the celebrity dramas, the celebrity sort of, soap that
I remember I was
we're
working
perpetually in.
in the prison system in Ireland for a short time. I worked there as helping people find housing after they had served their sentences. And I was talking to one of the prisoners one day, and he was talking about we were talking about corruption among the prison officers in the prison, and corruption vis-a-vis the prison officers and the prisoners, if you will, right? So I was talking to this prisoner, and I goes, "How are these prison officers getting away with doing X, Y, Z here?" And he says, "How did they get even to be like that?" And he looked at me and he goes, he says to me, "Well, if you were around wet paint long enough, some of it would rub off." And the same is true to answer your question, Silas. If you promote that culture and promote it often enough and heavy enough, it starts to rub off on Joe Public. And Joe
Yeah.
Public starts to think that's normal. And the kids will think it's normal. And that's how it works.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And remember that the idea in the past is the same idea as now, which
Yeah.
is the last thing that they want the individual human being to be is their organic self. So
Yeah. Okay.
you replace the previous false, but you don't leave it vacant. You destroy
Yeah.
the previous false to institute a new false that is acceptable towards the next direction that you want to take. Because the last thing you want to do is the thing that I actually, you know, advise, quote unquote, because it's not an advice, to do is to, okay, when you see something as false, leave it vacant so that eventually your organic self can fill it, right? So that you can discover who you actually are. But what these movements do is, yes, destroy the false, but then fill it in immediately with a new paradigm, with a new face, a new false, exactly to prevent the individual to be themselves and to then discover, their organic families, their organic tribes, if you want to call it that, whatever the name you prefer, um, uh, if left alone, and this will not. This is the last thing they allow is an empty space. If you notice, I mean,
Mhm.
there's nothing in the system that surrounds us that promotes an empty space. You know, you have an empty space, at least you put a park in it, right? You put even in city organization or whatever you call it, urban planning or whatever, you can't have an empty space. An empty space is a waste, they say, right? But this also has a psychological effect, which is
Mhm.
if you do not have an empty space inside after you remove something false, then you can't be yourself ever, because you always fill it in with someone else's story, right? With someone else's personality, with someone else's feelings, and so on and so forth, with someone else's music, right? Or art, if you want to put it like that. So, absolutely, I think that is the why this is done, and it rubs off, just like Zeal was saying.
Yeah.
You hammer it so much. I mean, we have an expression here in Portuguese, which is água mole em pedra dura tanto dá até que fura, which means soft water in hard stone. It hits it so much that eventually punctures it. So, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 And at the same time, you've got the input of the new culture. You also, as I think you alluded to there, there's a hollowing out as well, this atomization, individualistic culture, and sort of narcissistic kind of culture. You've got a perfect storm there to sort of change behavior. you know,
yeah. Mhm.
And just finally, before we go to the outro, um, exactly that counterculture is seeded, and we saw that with the first, I guess, the first recorded counterculture within the 1960s, which was, the sort of Timothy Leary, drop out, right? What was it? Tune in, drop out, that notion. So, again, these were ways to neutralize these organic feelings of the sort of anti-war movement and the political activism at the time. So, I guess we'll just we'll wrap up with this final quote from Bertrand Russell, "The Impact of Science on Society." Quote, "Diet, injections, and injunctions will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable, and any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible." And ultimately, as we've been discussing through this entire really fascinating conversation, this is what the music industry is about. It's what the culture creation is about. Absolutely. And we see that from time immemorial. Civilization produces this. No culture can be left to be produced organically, because civilization itself is an artificial machine. With that, guys, I want to thank you for joining me. That was a superb discussion.
Thank you very much, man. Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
And always a pleasure to talk with you as well, Zeal. It's great when you were able to join it.
Likewise, great talking to you.